My hand was shaking so hard I couldn't get the key into the lock. Not from cold. It was 91 degrees in Fresno that night. My hand was shaking because I just read a text message from my own bank, sent at 11:47 p.m., informing me that a new authorized user had been added to my business savings account. I hadn't added anyone. Behind me, through the screen door, I heard my mother's voice, low, almost gentle, the way you'd talk to a child you were about to disappoint. Dana, honey, don't make this bigger than it is. We're family. What's yours is ours. I didn't turn around. I just stood there on my own porch, keys in my fist, staring at a number on a screen that used to only have my name next to it. 48 hours later, 3 people in that house would not be speaking to each other. One of them would be speaking to a detective instead. My name is Dana Whitfield. I'm 43 years old and I built something out of nothing. 15 years ago I was mixing concrete by hand in a rented driveway with $1,100 and a truck that didn't have working AC. Today, Whitfield Outdoor Design does custom hardscaping and landscape architecture for half the good addresses in Fresno County. And last year we cleared just under $900,000 in revenue. I did that. Not a husband's salary, not a trust fund. 14-hour days, blown-out knees, and a decade of saying no to vacations. The $145,000 in that account wasn't luxury money. It was my expansion fund. The down payment on a second yard and a fleet upgrade I'd been saving toward for 4 years. It was also quietly my safety net, because I'd watched my father lose everything to a bad partnership when I was 19, and I swore I would never again be one signature away from broke. My mother, Carol, is 67. My younger sister, Renee, is 38, twice divorced, and has never in her adult life held a job longer than 14 months. For years, I told myself that made me the strong one and her the free spirit. That story was about to get a lot more expensive. 48 hours before that porch at a family dinner, my mother had stood up, tapped her wine glass with a fork like she was announcing an engagement, and said the words that started all of this. We added your sister to your account. She needs the security. You'll understand. I smiled. I said thank you for letting me know. Inside, something went very quiet and very cold. The dinner was at my mother's house, the same dining room I'd eaten in since I was 7, the same water-stained ceiling tile above the china cabinet that nobody had ever fixed. Renee showed up 40 minutes late in a dress I recognized from a boutique downtown. 300 and change I happened to know, because I'd priced it myself 2 months earlier and put it back on the rack. She had a new phone. She had a manicure. She ordered a bottle of Sancerre for the table like she was the one who'd built a company, and poured herself the first glass before anyone else's was full. My mother waited until the plates were cleared to make her announcement. She said it lightly, the way you'd mention you'd rearranged the furniture. We added your sister to your account. She needs the security. Renee didn't even look up from her phone. She just said, "Relax, Dana. It's not like I'm taking anything. It's just for emergencies," and took a sip of wine like the sentence had cost her nothing. I asked very calmly how exactly that had happened since I hadn't signed anything, hadn't been called by the bank, hadn't been asked. My mother's face did something I'd seen before. A specific tightening around the mouth she used whenever she'd already decided I was overreacting. Your father's watch is going to Renee's son when he turns 18. This is the same thing. It's just fair, Dana. You've always had more. I sat with that sentence for a long moment. You've always had more. 15 years of 11-hour days reduced to a birthright I'd apparently been hoarding. I said okay. I said I needed to check on something at the yard, and I left before dessert. I did not raise my voice. I did not slam a single door. But in the truck, in the dark of my own driveway, I called my bank's after-hours line and requested every transaction and every access log going back 90 days. The bank's fraud department called me back within the hour. A branch employee confirmed that a woman matching Renee's description had come in 11 days earlier with a document that appeared to be a notarized power of attorney, authorizing her as a secondary signer on my account for family estate planning purposes. I had never signed a power of attorney in my life. When I asked Renee about it directly, calmly over text, no accusation in the wording, she answered within a minute like she'd been waiting. Mom had an old POA template from when Dad was sick. We just updated the names. It's totally standard, don't stress, it's basically boilerplate. I let that sit. I said, oh, that makes sense, and told her I hoped her week was going well. Then I drove to the notary's office listed on the document. The notary, a tired-looking woman behind a UPS store counter, pulled her log and told me she had no record of notarizing anything for me, for Renee, or for my mother, on the date listed on that form. She looked at the signature page I'd photographed and told me flatly that the stamp on it wasn't even her current seal. It was one her office had retired 2 years earlier. I thanked her. I did not tell her why I was asking. When I texted Renee again, mentioning I'd just been curious about which notary they'd used, she took 4 hours to respond this time. When she did, the story had changed. Honestly, it might have been done through an online notary app. Those things auto-generate stamps sometimes, it's a known glitch. Don't be paranoid, Dana, this is exactly why nobody tells you anything. You turn it into an interrogation. I apologized. I told her I trusted her. That night I filed a fraud alert on my own account and quietly opened a new one. In a different bank in a different city in my name only. 3 days later I stopped by my mother's house to drop off groceries, something I still did every Sunday out of habit and honestly out of guilt. The front door was unlocked. I let myself in the way I always had. Renee's voice carried from the kitchen before I turned the corner. She's so easy, Mom, she'll never actually check. She's too busy being the responsible one to notice anything. By the time she figures it out, I'll already have moved half of it into the new LLC account. And legally that's just going to look like a transfer between family members. My mother laughed, an actual laugh, warm and easy, the laugh I used to fall asleep to as a kid. She does love feeling needed. Just keep telling her it's for security. She eats that up. I stood in the hallway with 2 bags of groceries and did not make a sound. Back home, I pulled the state business registry. There it was, Whitfield Family Holdings LLC, registered 19 days earlier. Listed manager, Renee Whitfield Cortez. Registered address, my mother's house. Listed initial capital contribution, $145,000. My exact balance. Filed before my mother had even made her toast at dinner. When I finally confronted Renee about the LLC directly, showing her nothing, just asking what it was for, she barely blinked. It's a family trust vehicle, Dana. Mom wanted something set up in case anything happened to her, so the whole family could access resources without probate delays. It's honestly a smart move. You should be thanking me for handling the paperwork instead of making it weird. I told her that made sense. I told her I appreciated her looking out for the family. That night, in a folder I'd started calling in my head the blue folder, an actual Navy accordion file I'd bought at an office supply store the day the bank first called me. I filed the bank fraud report, the notary's written statement, the LLC registration, and a printout of the account access logs showing Renee's device ID logging in 4 separate times. The following week, at what was supposed to be a casual coffee with my mother, I arrived 7 minutes early and heard them through the open kitchen window before I knocked. Once the transfer clears, Renee was saying, I'll tell her it was a bank error, get her all worked up about identity theft, and by the time it's fixed, the LLC will already own the equipment fund. She won't even think to check the business registry. She's not that kind of smart. My mother's response was the one that stayed with me longest. Not defensive. Not hesitant. Just satisfied. That's my girl. I knocked on the door 30 seconds later, smiling, holding a box of the lemon scones my mother liked. That night I made a decision, and I made it with a clear head, not an angry one. If I came at them with the blue folder and every fact laid out, they would do what people like that always do. Deny, deflect, cry, rally the rest of the family to their side, and turn me into the villain who attacked Mom over money. I'd seen my mother do it before, to an aunt, to a neighbor, to my father once years ago. She was very, very good at making other people's evidence look like cruelty, so I decided to become smaller. Over the next 2 weeks, I let my voice go soft and a little tired whenever I called my mother. I stopped correcting Renee when she talked over me. I started saying things like, I don't really understand all the banking stuff, honestly. You two handle it so much better than I do. I let my shoulders drop when I sat at their table. I stopped wearing my work boots to dinner and wore the soft cardigan my mother had given me 2 Christmases ago. The one that made me look, in her words, finally comfortable instead of so hard all the time. I let Renee see me squint at my own phone screen like the numbers confused me. Inside, I was running a construction company, coordinating with a forensic accountant I'd hired under a friend's name, so it wouldn't show up on any shared calendar, and preparing a formal police report with the Fresno County Financial Crimes Unit. But on the outside, I was becoming the exact soft, grateful, slightly overwhelmed older sister that let their guard all the way down. My mother told her book club I was finally opening up more. Renee told a mutual friend who told me later that I was getting easier to manage since the whole account thing. She barely even asks questions anymore. That was exactly the sentence I needed her to say. I set the bait on a Tuesday. I told Renee in a voice just a little too eager to please that I'd finally read up on LLCs and thought maybe I should add another $20,000 to Whitfield Family Holdings for the family to help it grow, since you two clearly know more about this than I do. I said I just needed her to walk me through it in person so I wouldn't mess anything up. She agreed immediately. Of course she did. We met at my mother's kitchen table on a Thursday afternoon. I brought a manila folder of blank paperwork and a phone I set face down on the table between us, so I wouldn't lose track of time before picking up a delivery. That phone was recording with both state consent requirements satisfied, because I'd made the appointment with my accountant/witness on speaker before I ever walked in, and I'd told Renee out loud on record that I was recording our conversation for my own notes, a fact she waved off without listening. I asked simple, soft questions. So if I put more in, whose name does it actually go under? Who can take money out without me knowing? What if something happened and I wanted my $145,000 back? Could I just ask for it? Renee, feeling generous, feeling untouchable, answered every single one. On tape. In detail. Including the sentence. Technically, once it's in the LLC, it's not really your money anymore, it's the LLC's, and I'm the manager, so legally no, you couldn't just take it back whenever you wanted. Under the table, my phone buzzed once. A text from my accountant watching the call. 2 words, got it. I smiled at Renee and asked if she wanted more coffee. My mother decided to throw a family dinner 2 weeks later to celebrate the LLC officially getting off the ground. Renee's words, printed on an actual invitation, sent to 12 people, including my aunt, my uncle, my grandmother, and 3 family friends. I wore the soft cardigan. I brought a bottle of wine. I said very little through the appetizers. Renee, 3 glasses in, stood up during the entree course and made her own toast, a real one this time, glass raised high. To smart financial decisions, and to Dana finally trusting the people who actually know how to handle money. A few people laughed. My mother beamed. Then Renee looked right at me, smiling, and delivered the line that ended her own evening. Some of us just weren't built to run things ourselves. That's okay, Dana. That's what family's for. I set down my fork. I did not raise my voice. I never do. I simply said, "You're right that I don't understand banking as well as you, Renee. That's actually why I hired someone who does." I opened the blue folder. I laid out, calmly, in order, in front of 12 family members, the forged power of attorney, and the notary's signed statement confirming it was fraudulent. The LLC filing, dated 19 days before my mother's toast, listing my exact account balance as initial capital. The bank's fraud report, confirming 4 unauthorized login attempts from Renee's device. And finally, I set my phone on the table, pressed play, and let the room listen to Renee's own voice explain in her own words that once my money was in the LLC, it wasn't mine anymore. Nobody laughed this time. My mother reached for the phone to stop it. I moved it out of her reach gently, the way you'd move a knife from a child's hand, and let it keep playing until it finished. Then I stood, picked up the fraudulent power of attorney with both hands, and tore it once cleanly down the middle, and set the 2 halves on the table beside Renee's untouched wine glass. "I already filed the fraud report before I got dressed for dinner tonight," I said. "The detective assigned to my case asked me to let him know if you were both in one place. So did the bank's investigator." I told them tonight would work. Two things happened within the next 11 minutes. My phone rang and I answered it in front of everyone, confirming to the officer on the line that yes, we were still at the address, and yes, both parties were present. And a car pulled into my mother's driveway, headlights cutting across the dining room window, 20 minutes after I'd texted the detective the address earlier that afternoon, because I had told him precisely when this dinner would happen and precisely who would be in the room. Renee was formally charged 11 days later with financial elder fraud statutes that, ironically, existed to protect people like my mother, because my mother, as the account's original co-signer request, had unknowingly made herself a co-defendant in the state's eyes for facilitating the forged documents, until her attorney negotiated a deal in exchange for full cooperation and restitution. The Whitfield Family Holdings LLC was frozen within a week, then formally dissolved by court order 2 months later, once the forensic accountant's report confirmed the entire $145,000 capital listing had been fabricated from documents I never signed. Renee's fiancé at the time, a quiet, decent man named Marcus who worked at my company's supply yard, completely uninvolved in any of it, called me the week after the dinner mortified, offering to pay back what he could from his own savings even though he owed me nothing. I told him he didn't owe me a dime, and 2 months later, when Renee's world came apart around him, I made sure his job at the yard was never in question, gave him a raise he'd already earned on merit, and told him plainly that none of this was his debt to carry. My mother lost her book club within the month, Small Towns Talk, and lost something else harder to name, the version of herself that got to be the matriarch everyone deferred to. She called me 8 times in 6 weeks. I answered twice. The bank closed the fraudulent account entirely and restored my full $145,000, plus recovered fees, within 90 days, once the fraud case was substantiated. It rained in Fresno for the first time in 4 months on the night my mother showed up at my door. She stood on my porch, the same porch where this whole thing started, in a coat that wasn't warm enough, her hair flattened by the rain, holding nothing. No purse. No umbrella. She said Renee's court dates had drained what savings she had left, that she had nowhere else to go for a few nights, that surely, after everything, family was still family. I stood in the doorway with the porch light on her face and mine in shadow. You told her I'd never check, I said. You said, that's my girl. I heard you say it, before either of you knew I was standing in your hallway. She didn't deny it. She just asked quietly if that meant I was going to let her stand in the rain. It means the definition of family you used against me for 2 months doesn't apply retroactively just because it's inconvenient for you now, I said. I told her there were shelters 2 miles east that took intake until midnight, and that I hoped sincerely she'd get somewhere warm. Then I stepped back and closed the door. I didn't slam it. I never do. My husband, Tom, was waiting in the kitchen with 2 mugs of tea already poured, like he'd known exactly when I'd need one. He didn't ask what happened. He just slid 1 mug across the counter and said, "You good?" "I'm good," I said. And for the first time in 2 months I actually was. Here's what I learned from all of it. The people who tell you that's just how family works are usually the ones about to take something that was never theirs to begin with. Real love doesn't need to be enforced with paperwork you never signed. And playing calm isn't the same as playing weak. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one already holding the evidence. If someone in your life has ever tried to guilt you into sharing what you built alone, I want to hear that story in the comments. If this hit home, hit like, subscribe for more real-life justice stories every week, and tell me below. Would you have opened that door in the rain?